This is going to be one of my more controversial videos. Welcome to another video, everyone. I'm Trevor, and I am eternally uncool. Panic at the Disco is a very polarizing band these days. It all sparked from fans believing that frontman and singer Brendon Urie kicked out all the other members so he could use the name recognition to release what is essentially glorified solo material. I don't really subscribe to that way of thinking. I used to, though. I even made a whole video about how the Brendon Urie era was poo-poo, pee-pee, not good. I deleted that video. It's lost media now. You can't find it. Don't try. But I've come around on Brendon and modern Panic, reassessing albums like Death of a Bachelor and Pray for the Wicked. I grew up a huge fan, and then I just abandoned them because TikTok likes to talk shit, and I'm a dirty little follower. Shame on me. What really brought me back to the Panic side, though, was their most recent and final album, Viva Las Vengeance. Viva Las Vengeance is a polarizing album. Take a drink every time I say polarizing. While critics actually gave it favorable reviews, the YouTube music community was less kind. Everyone from Crash Thompson to ARTV was shitting on this album, acting like it was the worst thing they've ever heard in their lives. They acted like this album was Metal Machine music or Philosophy of the World or something. But was it really that bad? Or are we all just blinded by nostalgia in the form of Ryan Ross and the songs of our collective youth?
No, but I got Cheese Whiz.
Today, I intend on answering those questions and more. In this video, I'm going to do my best to defend Panic at the Disco's worst album. Strap in, grab a drink or a snack, or grab the drink and snack before you strap in. That makes more sense. And let's get into the video. By the way, this is a Perrier energy drink. It's not like a White Claw. Who's ready for a history lesson?
Not me.
Too bad you're getting one. Panic at the Disco was formed in 2004 in the suburbs of Las Vegas by childhood friends Ryan Ross, who would play guitar and sing, and Spencer Smith, who would play drums. They would recruit their friend Brent Wilson to play bass, and Brent would invite his classmate Brendon Urie to jam with them. They started off as a Blink-182 cover band, rehearsing in Spencer's grandmother's living room. While Ryan Ross was originally the singer, the group would decide to make Brendon Urie the singer instead after hearing him sing backup. Brendon would work at a smoothie place to help pay for the band's rented rehearsal space, and he would sing for customers for tips. I cannot imagine doing that when I was a barista. That would have just destroyed my social anxiety. It would have been just through the roof. Plus, I was always hungover when I was a barista, so the singing was just a no-go. The band would eventually cease their education to pursue the band full-time, with Ryan Ross dropping out of college and Brendon Urie dropping out of high school. Ross and Urie would send a demo tape to Fall Out Boy bassist Pete Wentz, and Pete would be so impressed that he would sign them to his label Decay Dance. And the rest, as they say, is history. Panic's first two albums are certified emo classics. A Fever You Can't Sweat Out and Pretty Odd are seminal albums in the 2000s emo, pop punk, and scene. And for good reason. Fever was such a unique album to come out at the time, especially from like a pop punk band. You had breakbeats mixed with Baroque pop, these literary references being sung in a falsetto, and Pretty Odd was such a left turn, trading in the Cirque du Soleil aesthetic for a massive Beatles influence. With these two albums, Panic at the Disco established themselves as one of the biggest bands of the 2000s, procuring a spot in the emo trinity, which consisted of My Chemical Romance and their mentors, Fall Out Boy. The band would split, turning the quartet into a duo consisting of founding member Spencer Smith and frontman Brendon Urie. Ryan Ross and John Walker wanted to continue with the Beatles, Beach Boys influence they used on Pretty Odd, and so they formed a new band, the Young Vanes. Urie and Smith would continue on as Panic at the Disco, contributing music to the Jennifer's Body soundtrack and releasing their third and my own personal favorite Panic album, Vices and Virtues. Vices was a good mix of the Baroque kind of steampunk thing that they had going on Fever, mixed with pop appeal. The pop appeal that Brendon Urie is sort of known for these days. The album has hooks, and considering writing credits are shared with superstar producers John Feldman and Butch Walker, along with Pete Wentz, who, let's face it, he might as well be a member at this point. It was inevitable. Around this time, they would recruit Dallin Weeks on bass, who would continue to be a member up until his departure in 2018. In the 2010s, we saw Panic explore a more polished, radio-ready sound, more reminiscent of fellow Las Vegas natives Imagine Dragons than Fall Out Boy and the sound of the 2000s. Even though at this time, Fall Out Boy were kind of doing the same thing, but that's neither here nor there. The band would essentially become kind of a solo project at this point, with Brendon Urie playing and recording all the instruments in studio and recruiting musicians to play the songs on tour. He released 3 albums this decade, those being Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die, Death of a Bachelor, and Pray for the Wicked. These albums would prove to be massive successes, skyrocketing Brendon Urie into the mainstream and onto songs with everyone from Taylor Swift to Lil Dicky. I'm gonna swallow. You could find a better me tomorrow, and that's the hardest pill to swallow, baby. And that's true. And that's you. Sit down, don't think about you anymore, but I do. But with this success, we also saw fans start to turn on Brendon. With the departures of Spencer Smith and Dallin Weeks, many fans started to assume that Brendon Urie was kicking out band members so he could just use the band as a solo vehicle. Is there any truth to that? I don't know. I don't think it's my place to say yes or no. I'm not in Panic, though I wish I was. I could do the hand claps. That was weak. But I think there's more to it than just kicking out band members willy-nilly. Spencer Smith left to deal with some substance abuse problems he was dealing with at the time. And now he's a talent manager for Pete Wentz and Patrick Stump's label DCD2, formerly known as Decay Dance, the same label that Panic at the Disco was on.
Coincidence? I think not!
And Dallin left to pursue his own band, the Sparks-influenced I Don't Know How, with former Falling in Reverse drummer Ryan Seaman. By the way, as I'm writing this, I just found out that Ryan Seaman isn't in the band anymore because allegedly he was stealing? If that's true, that's messed up. But the only source is Dallin's mother-in-law, so I'm gonna take it with a grain of salt. But if it's true, dude, holy shit. And Brendon's touring band would have consistent members like bassist Nicole Rowe, but fans still turned on him, as well as Panic as a whole. In May of 2022, Panic at the Disco would set up a cryptic website called Shut Up and Go to Bed. Later that month, they would release the title track off of their upcoming album, Viva Las Vengeance. And this is where the video really begins. That's right, that whole thing was just a prelude. Now we get into the real meat and potatoes. Hey, where are you going? Hey, come back. In the early 2020s, we saw the return of some huge emo acts. My Chemical Romance made their triumphant return with the ultra-heavy Foundations of Decay, as well as a massive tour and a headlining spot on the inaugural When We Were Young Fest. After that, it was announced that Paramore would be working on new music, and they released their single, This Is Why. Everyone, including myself, was waiting for Fall Out Boy to do something, anything. Eventually they would, but between Paramore and Fall Out Boy, another huge emo act from the 2000s would release new music. That act was Panic at the Disco, and that music was Viva Las Vengeance. Viva Las Vengeance is probably one of the most interesting albums to come out in a long time, at least in my opinion. It was recorded on 8-track tape to achieve that retro sound. It reminds me a lot of Pretty Odd, where Pretty Odd sounded like it could have been a lost Beatles album from the 60s. Viva Las Vengeance sounds like it could be a compilation of B-sides from 70s era Police. Does that make sense? The retro recording style was a huge selling point for me. Like most people my age, I grew up listening to classic rock radio. Hearing music that sounds like that in the year 2022 and from a huge band was just really cool to me. Urie said that recording on tape kept him honest, and I definitely hear that honesty in a lot of the lyrics and the overarching story on this album. Is this a concept album? I don't know. It definitely has some reoccurring themes and characters. Brendon Urie said the album is a look back at who he was 17 years ago and who he is now. It's also been described as a cinematic musical journey about the fine line between taking advantage of your youth, seizing the day, and burning out. The story of this album is pretty much the rise of Panic at the Disco as told by Brendon Urie. Songs like Local God talk about a band gaining momentum quickly and getting signed and being the ire of local bands. You also have songs that are really theatrical and reminiscent of early Panic. Star Spangled Banger, God Killed Rock and Roll, and Sad Clown are all prime examples of the theatricality we've come to know from a frontman like Brendon Urie. He employs his falsetto tastefully, never overdoing it like he did on Pray for the Wicked. That's something I really appreciate when singing along to these songs because I can't hit a high note to save my life. One of the really interesting things about this album is the influences. Of course, you have the Beatles and Queen, bands you'd expect Panic to crib from, but there's also whiffs of Thin Lizzy in the guitar parts on this album and in the vocals on Star Spangled Star Spangled Banger.
Me kitty and Bernie went to the meadows, ma. Got a ring in my bottom lip. Guess who just got back today? Them wild-eyed boys that had been away.
And one of my favorite songs off this album, probably one of my favorite Panic songs of all time, Don't Let the Light Go Out, employs an interpolation of Janis Ian's At 17.
I learned the truth at 17, that love was meant for beauty queens.
What other emo bands are referencing Janis Ian?
Your mom's chest hair.
Critics were surprisingly kind to this album. I don't normally expect critics to give a good review to a Panic at the Disco album, and I'm normally fine with that. It makes no difference to me. It holds an 82 out of 100 on Metacritic, which as a C student myself, I think is pretty damn good. Hot Press described the album as a love letter to rock's golden age. Kerrang gave the album 4 out of 5 stars, as did the NME. Of course, just like with any other musical release in the history of all time, there were negative reviews. Clash magazine gave it a 5 out of 10, which obviously not good. And I'm of the opinion that you don't need to take what critics say to heart. Take it with a grain of salt. You like what you like, and you don't let anyone make you feel bad about that. But the fact that the critics received this album so well is just shocking. Especially since fans really didn't like it. When the album came out, I avoided reviews of it on YouTube and TikTok, everywhere. Every music review channel or rock-oriented channel would just jump on the chance to just negatively review this album. And that's fine, that's their opinion, it's their jobs. But does it deserve the vitriol that it got? Does it deserve to be called Panic's worst album? One of the criticisms many fans had on this album was that Brendon Urie's voice didn't sound as good as it did on past albums. Which I personally think isn't true. I think his albums sound great, especially considering the fact that they were recorded on 8-track tape machine. And I hear this all the time when bands from the 2000s release new music or start doing tours. Taking Back Sunday recently went on tour a few years ago, And I just kept seeing TikToks of fans recording Adam Lazzara singing and just saying things like, oh, I paid for this, I paid for this, wow, he sounds like that and I paid for this? I think it's pretty rude and pretty unfair. Considering a lot of these frontmen are in their late 30s and early 40s, their voices are gonna sound different. Especially since some of these guys partied on the Warped Tour back in the day. It's just like an athlete who ages and can't run or throw as good as they used to. I should tell you how not into sports I am when I say run and throw. As a fan of a lot of these bands, it makes me really mad and upset to see maybe like younger or newer fans, I'm not trying to call out the younger generation, they're all fine, to see fans just recording someone on what might be an off night. But Brendon's voice sounds just as good as it did 10 years ago, in my opinion. And the fact that it's so raw makes it even better. It sounds like a real rock and roll album. Another criticism I saw was for songs like Middle of a Breakup and the line, make up sex in the middle of a breakup. Make up sex in the middle of a breakup. Fans, or I guess anti-fans at this point, were complaining that he's just talking about sex. And like, yeah, every artist has a song about sex, whether you know it or not. The 1975 has a song just called Sex. And what's it about? You guessed it. Sex. Sex is natural. Sex is good, just like George Michael said. And in terms of the album's story, I'm sure it has some connection to Brendon's real life. And don't think that what I'm saying means you have to like the song. You don't have to like the song. You don't have to like anything. Where am I going with this? Why has this album gotten more hate from fans than something like, say, Pray for the Wicked, a polished pop album that seems far removed from what we know Panic to be? Viva Las Vengeance has more in common with albums like Pretty Odd and Vices and Virtues than it does with Too Weird or Death of a Bachelor. It trades Imagine Dragons style electronics for a more genuine rock and roll sound. If anything, this album should have been their most successful. Why wasn't it? I think a lot of the criticism from fans still has to do with them believing that Brendon Urie kicked everyone out of the band, which I can't stress enough just isn't true. There are numerous bands in the history of music who lose key members and have to soldier on with just a singer or a guitar player or, God forbid, a bass player. What happened with Panic is nothing new. Everyone from the Beach Boys to Asking Alexandria has experienced the same thing. Why is the vitriol so much more palpable for Brendon Urie? I think it has something to do with stan culture. We all have a soft spot for the Ryan Ross era.
Cheese whiz.
It's nostalgia. We love those songs because we heard them when we were young. But the Brendon era lasted way longer than the Ryan era, and it experienced way more success. And Ryan Ross, for all intents and purposes, doesn't seem to hold a grudge against his former bandmate. I don't see him throwing shade on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And the same people who like to tout Ryan Ross as the genius behind Panic at the Disco don't seem to have the same energy for the solo material he's dropped or his work with Z Berg. I'm not calling anyone out. This channel's not what that's about. I'm just saying. And I love Ryan Ross as a songwriter. He's influenced my own songwriting immensely with his literary references. But the fact that Panic at the Disco saw more success under Brendon Urie's leadership.
Coincidence?
It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. I am getting so hot. I wanna take off all my clothes. Viva Las Vengeance acts as Panic's swan song. It tells the story of the band's rise through the eyes of its only remaining member, Brendon Urie. It combines elements from every one of their albums. The experimentation of Fever, the classic rock influence of Pretty Odd, the artsiness of Vices, and the pop appeal of Too Weird, Death of a Bachelor, and Pray for the Wicked. It's almost the perfect album for Brendon to close this chapter of the band on. And I do think that Panic will be back at some point in the future. Maybe not as soon as some diehard loyalists would hope, but he will be back. If My Chemical Romance can come back, Panic can come back too. An interesting little Easter egg I saw in a YouTube video was that the last track on Viva Las Vengeance, Do It to Death, the end of it leads in to the opening of A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. I think that's pretty cool. All of it coming full circle. What do you think of this album? Do you think it deserves the vitriol, or do you like it? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it. I love doing these defense videos. I love looking at an album that most people consider bad and finding something to like about it. If you feel so inclined, you should subscribe to my channel. I talk about music and music culture and anything else that interests me. And it's not all emo and pop punk. I like things like hip hop and jazz too. You can see I got Thelonious Monk here to my left, and I got Doom behind me. Share this video. Share it with every Panic fan you know and every Panic anti-fan as well. Maybe I will get more of those nice comments I got like I did on my last Panic video. Those were fun. I'm trying to get 100 subscribers by summertime. When I get 100 subscribers, I have something big planned for a 100 subscriber special. I'm not going to tell you what that is now. I want to wait until I get closer to my goal. So if you want to know what my 100 subscriber special is going to be, I highly recommend subscribing, sharing this video, liking, commenting. All of that really helps me to reach as many people as possible and find prospective subscribers. If you want to follow me on social media, you can. I only ever use Instagram, so I'll put that somewhere on the screen. With that, I'm Trevor. Stay uncool. That's the end of the video. Goodbye. Not me, not me, not me, not me. No, no. That should do it.